Yeah, that's fine with me.
It's good it's
We're
good
talking to
content.
yourself.
Not yet, not yet. But the welcome to the Regeneration podcast, friends and family. The It's been a while, my friend. We
I
haven't
know.
talked since maybe the last podcast with was it John Vervaeke? No.
I think we didn't we do one after that
Oh, on Modern Love. Yeah. Yeah.
on Modern Love. That's right.
So how have we've both obviously been so busy, we haven't even like texted as much, although we do have a lot of guests kind of lined up. What's been keeping you busy too? All of a sudden these weeks just passed.
Uh well, it's spring and I live on a
Yeah.
farm.
Yeah. Amen.
So
Say no more.
so my barn is full of baby animals, baby chicks and ducks,
How many
and then
chicks?
30,
Okay. Do
20
you
for me.
buy do you buy your feed from a grain store? Like laying pellets, or how do you
I
feed all your
get
chicks?
my feed from the Amish.
Okay.
There's a Amish farmer, I don't know, 15 miles away, not even that.
Yeah.
I get so he's got feed. Uh yeah, but so that kind of stuff's going on. Plus, I gotta show you. I don't
Yeah,
know
I
if
want
you
to see
saw
it.
this, but I
Well,
was so
I think I
stoked.
know what you're going to show, and I'm like, super excited. Novalis, I hope.
Nope.
No, okay. Well, then you've got a couple of things to show us, I think.
This.
All right, describe it. It's beautiful. It's a different shape than I've seen.
It's a Westbury 12 string guitar, 5020.
1520.
That 5020, that's the model
Oh,
number.
okay.
They could have
Okay.
picked a cooler name.
I thought it was
But
a
here's the
design
thing.
of a. I thought it was a design of an old lute from the year 1520.
Yeah, I bought that guitar in 1980, the day after my graduation party, because I had 350 bucks and it was burning a hole in my pocket. And I bought a
Yeah.
guitar. And here's the funny gosh, probably 30 years ago, somebody broke into my house and stole all of my gear.
Wow.
I had some really nice guitars, but they're all gone. And they stole the case for this one, but this one was not in the case.
Mm,
So I don't know how they couldn't figure out it's a light guitar. Um, but it hasn't been playing well for a long time, at least 20 years.
okay.
And I played a few gigs with the Corktown Popes over the last year,
Okay.
kind of special gigs. I don't want to do it on a regular.
People can
And
look up Michael with the Corktown Popes on YouTube.
that's right. And the bass player that's been playing with us, wonderful human being named Dave Urachek, it also does guitar repair and stuff like that. So we're at this rehearsal. I said, "Hey, I got this 12 string. You think you can take a look at it?" And I gave it to him, and he fixed it. It's beautiful. I mean,
Oh, wow.
can't believe how happy I am.
Oh, I'm so happy for you. It
Ah,
reminded me of like when we were talking about modern love. It was such a simple thing you said. Two things you said in the last couple of podcasts have stayed with me. One time, we were talking about, Michael, it might have been on the phone, but it was I was just talking about like in church. I work for the church, but if we were to kind of reconstitute anything, if we brought back a Michaelmas Day thing, you were just emphatic. It seemed like in your blood. So clearly you could see, but don't do it in a church hall because people act weird when they're anywhere around church. That stayed with me. Can you unpack
hmm.
that a little bit? I mean, it is what it is. I'm not saying, but it's so
Well, I
true.
think in church, I mean, whether it's church hall or a school, um, there's kind of an egregore that drops over, right?
Yeah, right.
There's kind of and it's not necessarily bad, but it's also not open. And so, to my mind, when you have these, kind of spontaneous and informal gatherings,
Hmm.
um, there's not the onus of, well, you're at church or, well, you're at the school where you can't, right? You can't do that. You can't do
And
this.
you're not on clock time necessarily. Like it begins at 4 o'clock. Show up,
Yeah.
you know.
And so, yeah, we're on fluid time on those
It's
kinds of
kind of
things.
like a school meets a living room, a church hall ultimately,
Mhm.
you know. So,
And I think that's, I mean, I'm sure, the danger for me is when things get too formalized, people have expectations about what it's supposed to be like,
right.
right? And just that expectation, I think you could say, is is an aspect of the egregore. I mean, where does that expectation come from? Because that expectation also tells you, like a little voice in your head, what you can and can't say,
Right.
right? So, and so that's why I think it can't be in the church hall.
Yeah.
It's too
Well, no, but
domesticated.
you need to know how eloquent that was. I mean, for that listener, see, it's so natural to you to speak like that. For that was even still, you unpacking that. There was a lot I learned from that 30.
Yeah.
I was, what was it in? Oh, it might have been Emil Bach's book on the liturgical year, which we both have. But you get a
Okay, right
sense
over there.
from reading it, he has on Golgotha and the Grail that the Grail might have been constituted by really deep conversation, right? Like these people felt a oneness because starting with the conversations between Mary and Jesus prior to the 3 years,
Yeah.
and also the conversation like at the foot of the cross between Mary and the beloved disciple, that some stream that it went to, in this case, it went to Joseph of Arimathea and Longinus, if that's how it's pronounced,
Hmm.
that then this conversation, and maybe that Longinus is that warrior spirit, the guy who
Yeah.
stabbed the side of Christ. But I love this image that you could cement that thing we feel of is so tight, it's almost like a metal ring in the Knights of the Round Table, is really
Hmm.
just a bond of conversation. Again, that flowing between a real intersubjectivity. And that
Yeah.
could be lost in a parish hall where you could have it more likely in a home setting. Right?
Well, in all those kinds of settings, I mean, hierarchy may not be imposed, but it's implied, right? You
Right,
know
right, right.
what I mean? I mean, it's just how it is.
No,
And then
your
oh, it's
phenomenology. You should do a phenomenology of like church buildings and things,
you
just like you
could.
did your land for your book of poetry.
Oh yeah, that came out since the last time we spoke, I think.
Yeah, and your introduction to Novalis.
And I haven't seen the Novalis yet. I don't even know if it's for sale yet.
Okay.
But Meditations in or no, wrong book. Mythologies to the of
And
the
don't you
wild of
think, Michael,
God.
that like I think that conversation you just spoke of like church halls, you have our listeners could say you have a gift to bring by like reading the atmospheres of spaces and things. And so you did this with your own land.
I did. And the
Yep.
other thing is, see that artwork right there?
Who did it? Oh, you know who it is. It's guest, twice blessed, Lindsay Rose.
Fan favorite, Lindsay
Yeah.
Rose. And get this, so yesterday I visited two of our former guests, Katie Hartsock and Jonathan Geltner,
Okay. Great people.
because I was on my way to pick up my guitar, and they live on the way, and I wanted to drop off Katie's copy of this because she's one of my jacket
That's really
endorsees,
cool.
endorsers, I should say. And what Katie said, and I'm gonna, Lindsay, if you're watching, you gotta come clean with us. Katie thinks the deer is me as a deer.
Like, okay, so hold it back a little bit. Let me see. I guess I'd have to, you're showing it clearly to the camera. I'm just not taking in the gestalt. So I'm gonna look it up online, and next week I'll give you my feedback on whether Katie's right or
Yeah.
not. Yeah.
And so
Katie's
if,
much more perceptive than me. She's a
and you know
poet,
who
so
speaking of another guest of ours, actually another two of our former guests are also on the back of this book. Martin Shaw
yeah.
and Daniel Polikoff.
Yep. I saw those blurbs.
And
Oh, you know what? Here, Martin Shaw, if you don't mind a little hyperlinking, then we'll come back. So Martin Shaw, I was at a funeral of I've mentioned him, beloved mentor, Father Ed Dillon, about 6 weeks ago.
mhm,
Then a priest, listener of this podcast, Father Ken Arnold. No, Ken Kirkman. I'm so sorry. There's a deacon in my diocese, Ken Arnold. Father Ken Kirkman, who is a student at Geneseo. He listens to the Regeneration podcast. He just dropped in conversation at the reception for this funeral, this notion of 12 secret names for a tree. That came
mhm,
from Martin Shaw. What a great
yep,
spiritual discipline instead of all this kind of lachrymose piety. And then I thought of another one as I was reading my favorite, this John Cooper Powys. He was
mhm,
saying that the way we react with nature phenomenologically is not sexual, but it would be more like eating every day. So every day he goes outside,
Mhm.
he uses those senses because he wrote a book called On Growing Old, or the Philosophy of Growing Old Right. I'm convinced it's an esoteric masterpiece where he's just using that hanger upon which to throw these wild insights. But he would say that as we age, we have to find that relationship with the universe that a baby has, just looking around and that, but at a much higher level. But
Mhm.
he would say that's a spiritual discipline then. But he would say every day you walk out of doors, and you could do this on your farm, Mike. He said there's a touch of the day, kind of the warmth, the smell of the day, of course. And then what would be the third one he used? That might seem a little, the touch of the day, the smell of the day, and the taste of the day, the taste of the day, you know? And every day register that. And because he's so gifted, he could go into nuances with the
Mhm.
day I experienced this morning that I could never see. But that's still for our listeners. Some people have asked me about this, like embodied practices.
Mhm.
These are practices, 12 secret names for a tree. I've tried it a couple of times since his episode. Some trees I call the three aunties
Yeah.
there's these three oak trees that I look at, and I could come up with four, but I started to fudge it after that.
Mhm.
And so Martin Shaw sees more than I do. Yeah.
Well, so here, yeah, actually, speaking of that, so as you know, my latest book is full of this kind of stuff.
Yeah, right.
Um, and so so in the woods around us in the recreation area, there's a section that used to be farm, which the state probably bought 80 years ago from during the Depression, maybe
Okay.
more, 80 some years ago. And there's still like hedgerows out there, windbreaks, but mostly just kind of like wild meadow. And once in a while, the state will go through there and plow it up so it doesn't get overgrown with trees and make a good habitat for hunting. But I went on a long walk there a couple weeks ago. And around where we live, there are a lot of marshes. So I had to go
Oh,
around the marsh, and I went down as far as I could go before having to walk through a marsh again. And there was this beautiful grove of oaks and maples.
hmm.
And I invite people to try this because I tried it. So I just found this one tree was just so beautiful. I didn't touch it, but I put my hands close to it till I could feel its energy,
Mm-hmm.
maybe about 8 inches away or so. And it works. I mean, if you try this, I mean, maybe I'm just super sensitive to that, but you can feel something.
Mm-hmm. There's
And then
no
I
doubt.
came home and I have an electroculture post in one of my gardens, and I tried to do it around there, and it didn't feel anything. Not like I
Mm-hmm.
felt around the tree, which was kind of interesting.
Yeah, you bet. You bet.
And the other
All
thing
that
I should
stuff.
mention
Yeah.
before we move on, well, first, believe it or not, speaking of another guest, in fact, her album just dropped a couple days ago, is
Oh, okay.
Olivia Cheney.
Yeah. What's the name of the new album?
And as thank you to her for all the kindness she did to us, I sent her a copy of the book.
Wow.
And she emailed me. Hadn't heard from her in a while, but she emailed me thanking me and telling me because when she emailed me, I said, it's going to take a long time to get there, but it only took 5 days, which shocked me.
Isn't that the thing about the post office? It's not that they're fast or slow. They're beguiling.
Hmm.
Something takes months and something else is there without paying overnight delivery. It's there in a day.
But anyway, yeah. So listeners of the Regeneration podcast, if you like that interview we did with Olivia, her album's out now. You can get it. It's even available in vinyl. That is so retro,
Buy
and it's called
both
Circus of
Michael's book
Desire.
and Olivia's new CD. I mean,
Yeah.
her work, and you'd be doing a good thing with each one.
Yeah, and then and sorry, during this hiatus, believe it or not, Mike, I've been getting emails from people who are uh big listeners of the show.
I've had a fascinating. I hope he's listening. John McCormick is his name.
Uh,
Just a kid from Rochester who
oh,
called
I
me
know
at my
John.
office.
Yeah,
This is a different one.
I think I know John.
No, this is a
Different
different one.
John.
So there's one we have in common on Facebook friends. This is just a
Yes.
guy who a wild story growing up in Rochester that someday he'll be on the podcast. He's really great with embodiment, so that's a theme obviously, but
Yeah.
he's so good. And what his story from just being so bored at a grammar school, dropping out of high school, just starting to work with his hands, getting tired every day, getting lost. It's wild, but so again, probably what you're experiencing. You just get an email or a phone call, then
Mhm.
you meet these guys and you talk to them, these listeners, and they're awesome.
So I want to give a shout out to Rebecca and Jared, who
Okay.
emailed this week. And I think Jared's in England. I'm not sure.
What's
Rebecca is for sure in England.
what's the basic
Rebecca's.
sentiment that Jared and Rebecca are sending?
Oh, they just like, I mean, I think they like what we're doing.
Yeah.
And they even like when we bullshit like this.
That's an increasing thing I get. People
That's
are,
right.
in a beautiful way, they're looking for camaraderie or
Hmm.
an ease of exchange.
Now, I got another question for you,
Bring it
Mike.
on, bring it on.
I don't know if you have noticed, I'm sure you have, that our engagement has dropped slightly since Larry was on the show talking about,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Because that we got kicked off for that one.
Real tricky. No. And I got some type of warning even yesterday about
Did you
advanced
really?
features. Yeah, it didn't specify anything in particular, but that shall not be named, I guess. Well, I got to think it through. We'll talk sometime.
We can always
Thanks.
move to Substack. They have a pretty
Yeah.
decent podcast
Okay.
platform.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah.
So
Take that. Yeah.
I theoretically, I knew I just wanted to catch up with you and hear how you're doing. I had to do a number of kind of over Lent, some different mission talks at churches and so forth. I'm somewhat, I can speak to a younger audience. I think most people over 60 have no idea what I'm talking about. But then there's other people like professed religious who are friends of mine who just get everything. And I don't know, is it a dialect of apart from the fact that I talk too fast, and I apologize to our listeners, the the way of getting at some of the stuff that we do on the Regeneration podcast about, I think 60% of the population are just non-conductors for it.
Yeah, yeah, it's weird, because I remember there was somebody I wanted to interview who didn't want to do it because we're not slow enough.
Okay.
And I'm like, you guys talk so fast. It's a, I'm from Detroit, man. That's how we talk.
And the
We're
younger generation, not that you and I are super young, but they do talk faster. Even most people,
well,
we probably talk faster than most people our age.
well, and I talk to kids all the
Yeah,
time,
right, right.
whether it's teaching or my own children, right? So, and it's just how it is. So
Yeah,
I'm so sorry. You're not going to get the slow contemplative answer.
yeah.
Yes. Because some people, I'm not naming names, but they get this whole persona. Oh, yeah, that's so spiritual. Thank you for sharing that. And that's phony as far as I'm concerned. Um,
Spiritual. We got to get rid of
hey,
most of those words. Go ahead.
so we're recording this on
Yeah,
Holy Saturday, right?
yeah.
So
Super
what do
important.
you guys do for Easter?
Because I've worked for the church and my wife is a musician, it's always, this year's a
For
little
work
bit
day?
different because I'm working in more of an officey job. But as much as the family can gather, some tie into the Triduum, as well as then an Easter gathering. Today I'm going after this axe throwing because Easter, it's going to correspond. There's a wedding shower in the family, and
Hmm.
so the girls are going there, and some of the guys are going to go axe throwing
Tomorrow they are?
today.
Oh, today.
Yeah, and then tomorrow we'll go to church and then have dinner at my mother-in-law's house. Should be nice. How about you?
Well, it's gonna be big because it's when you have 9 kids, it's big even if it's small.
Yeah, right.
But 2 of the kids won't be here because they live out of state. But everybody else will be here. Plus, Bonnie's family will all be here. That's a lot of people right
That's a
there.
lot of people. What are you
And
serving? What's the main?
well, our theme this year, we're doing a Mediterranean theme.
Wow.
Not because connecting it to Easter, because we were supposed to have a Mediterranean themed dinner for my mother-in-law's birthday, but she got sick, so we had to cancel. So everybody saved their stuff. So we're having lamb. Actually, one
Okay.
of our
Yeah.
we're having lamb
Yeah.
and ham. We're having lamb and ham, both that were raised here on the farm.
For years, when Amy and I used to host Easter pretty regularly, now we go to her mom's house. It was lamb was the thing. I'd smoke a turkey, and then I'd roast a lamb and then just smoke it for a little while with the turkey.
Hmm.
And my sister, I know for one, would say it was her favorite meal of the year by far. I like lamb a lot.
Yeah, me too. And I went out and bought a bunch of Greek wine and actually some Metaxa, which is a Greek brandy.
Okay.
So because our part of it is because our former pastor, God rest his soul, Father Cyril Atack, died before COVID, but he was like a grandfather to my kids and like a father to me and Bonnie.
Yeah.
And after church, every Sunday, he'd say, all right, my son, let's go home. And we go into his the rectory, and we'd both have a shot of Metaxa.
Okay.
So my older kids will will be sharing a shot of Metaxa
That's
with
great. That's
in
great.
Father Cyril's honor.
Yeah.
And
Very
Father Cyril
cool.
was Greek.
Okay. And how
Um,
long ago did he pass away?
I can't 2019 maybe.
Okay. Who
It was a
had in
beautiful.
common? Father Charles McCarthy, nonviolence guy?
No,
Emmanuel Charles
but
McCarthy?
no, no, Father Emmanuel knew him. In fact, Father Emmanuel,
Okay.
here's a great story, was came to the funeral, and a couple of my sons and I were both, I was kind of like a subdeacon, not really, no,
Hmm.
unofficial subdeacon. And because I actually, through the last 2 years of Father Cyril's ministry, I was basically his right hand man, and I distributed communion. He couldn't do
Yeah,
it.
you had mentioned. Yeah.
And even sometimes he would even have me read the gospel, which is a verboten, right?
Hmm.
A lay person reading the gospel, it's not done. But he was so sick, and there was nothing else to do. But anyway, at his funeral, Father Cyril's funeral, Father Emmanuel was one of Khan's celebrants, and there was a
Okay.
bishop there, and had to be 6 or 7 priests and deacons.
Yeah.
And at the kiss of peace, which in the Eastern Rite usually if only happens between the clergy, and I mean
Okay.
ordained clergy. And I was standing there, and a Father Emmanuel came over to me, and he gave me the kiss of peace. And while all the other clerics looked on in horror because he was
So
breaking
in
protocol.
that tradition, on the other side of the what I always reduce to a proscenium arch, but are you exchanging a piece amongst the people in the pews, or is it just all it's only an altar thing?
No, it's just the clergy,
Interesting.
just the clergy. Kind of like how the chalice used to be reserved to just the clergy in the Western
Right, right,
Church.
right. Yeah, yeah.
But then Father Emmanuel comes up and he gives me the kiss of peace, and he looks at me and says, "These guys have no idea what you did for this church. You
Wow.
deserve this more than they do."
Mm.
And and actually, I think I mentioned he died not too long ago, Father
Wow. Yeah,
Emmanuel.
yeah, right. Yeah, you're right, right, right,
You
right.
know,
Because he had
he
come to
was a
Geneseo.
good human
Courageous
being,
witness for, yeah,
and he
nonviolence.
was the
So,
one who was, you know, that Father Charles McCarthy, the peace priest, was his mentor.
okay, gotcha. So
Yeah,
that's
and that's how I
McCarthy
met.
is the one who came to Geneseo. Yep.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's how I met Charlie.
Yep, yep. He was good friends
And
with the guy
and
I talked to weekly.
you know the story about Charlie's daughter, right?
No.
Oh, I'll tell you. You'll love this story. Um, so Charlie, I don't think he's still alive, but goes around giving Christian nonviolence talks all over the world.
That's his thing. Yeah.
That is his thing, and he's been doing it for probably 50 years.
Wow.
Um, and he's got 7 kids, maybe 9. He got a bunch of kids. One of his kids, her name is Benedicta, and she was named after the religious name of Saint Edith Stein,
Right. I was going to guess
right?
that, but
And I mean, Edith Stein, I adore Edith Stein. I dedicated one of my books to her.
hmm.
And what happened? So Benedicta, I think, is probably 30 now, around there.
Okay.
But when she was 2, and you know how this goes with families, the flu was going around the house, and they had, the Tylenol, the liquid Tylenol was up on the counter, and little Benedicta crawled up on a chair and drank the whole bottle of Tylenol.
Wow.
And she rushed to the hospital, and her liver was breaking down, and Charlie was distraught, of course, but he was supposed to go someplace to give a talk,
Hmm.
and just happened that next to his desk, the autobiography of Saint Teresa of Avila had fallen down, and who was the reason Edith Stein became a nun. That
Hmm.
book
Right, right, right.
became Catholic, even, or stopped being an atheist. And he opened it up, and it was he picked it up, and it was open to a page where he had underlined when Saint Teresa is talking to Christ, and basically what Christ says: "You take care of my work, and I'll take care of yours."
Wow.
So Charlie decided, I'm going to go do the talk anyway, and people started praying for the prayers of Edith Stein, and Benedicta got better like that. and you can
Wow,
actually
wow.
still find them. For a while, you could find them on the internet with like a 2020 or some show
Uh-huh.
where they interviewed the family and the doctors, and the doctors said no, she was dying. She should be dead. I
So
don't know why
wow,
she
okay.
did
So
this.
wow, this wasn't like we didn't quite know what was going on. She drank the Tylenol. It
No.
was a bad scene and he took off. No, there was people who corroborated that, that she
Right.
was she was on death's door. Yeah, interesting.
Because of that miracle, that was the miracle that made Teresa or Edith Stein
Yeah.
a saint.
Oh wow, wow,
And
wow.
get this.
Uh-huh.
So Father Emmanuel didn't go, but his wife was there.
Yeah.
And she went to the canonization mass and Benedicta was there,
Yeah.
where St. John Paul II and Charlie celebrated the mass.
Wow, wow, wow.
That's
All
kind
those
of
are
big.
wild stories. Yeah, that's
And that
super.
happened, that canonization happened while Father Emmanuel was our pastor back in the 90s, had to be.
And I mean no disrespect by this though, but like I don't I wouldn't have gone to the talk, you know?
I
Or
wouldn't have
would
either, but Charlie thought Jesus was telling him it's not up to you, it's up to me.
that's heavy. I'm trying to
Right?
process that to
Yeah,
say,
it's how, I can't.
yeah,
I don't think I would either.
yeah. And I'm
But
trying to think of, that wow, that how it ever came to such a pass that and
well, you know what? And,
I'm not judging him. I'm just there's
and
certain
here's the thing,
situations where we know we can't do anything by our presence.
right?
You know.
And I went to one of Charlie's talks, or it's like a weekend workshop one time,
Mhm.
and the thing that really stuck with me, and I've been trying to incarnate it ever since, is he said, "Radical trust produces radical consequences."
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I think that's what he was trying to live by what he had been preaching. That's what I mean, I couldn't
Okay.
have done it, I think,
Yeah,
but
radical trust. Fair enough. Fair enough. I think that's where we're going. It reminds me, again, one more. We're going to hyperlink a bit today, but Dietrich Bonhoeffer. We've talked about the name. Right now, he's surfacing for me pretty profoundly. But something I'd read about him that I did not know to be true is that he, um, with this whole idea of a religionless Christianity, for what it's worth, he knew, as you and I have always supposed, though I don't think we've talked about it, is that, so much of our language is just so jargony. And it reminds me of radical trust. So like Bonhoeffer knew that we had to start breaking apart these words too. Like he's talked to somebody,
mhm,
even Ivan Illich began his book, The Rivers North of the Future. And we'll save it for another whole episode, but he had to work on what the gospel is, right? So we
right.
basically say like Jesus Christ, my personal Lord and Savior. We want to say, slow down, Bucko. What is the
Yeah.
Savior? Because what is salvation? That's one. What is Lord? What are we being
Mhm,
saved from? What are we to?
right.
A lot of us have a default setting that we do these things that are Catholic to get to a place called A. But anyhow, one of the ones Bonhoeffer in his prison letters, he didn't really get to breaking these down, but some of them were righteousness and so forth. But it was kind of like radical trust. You shared that
Mhm.
story, and I wanted to get into it. But he did break down the word repentance a little bit. And you know what he came up with? And I think of young people and what we were talking about earlier regarding conversation. But he broke down
Mhm.
repentance into ultimate honesty.
Wow.
Isn't
I
that
like that.
wild? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know what?
Isn't it?
I've been thinking about that exactly this week.
Yeah,
You know, I was thinking because I've been, you see stuff come across social media,
yeah.
and I thought, you know what? My problem has been for the last 30 years, I've been too tolerant
Uh-huh.
because,
I think our listeners are going to get a kick out of that one.
well,
It
I mean,
finally
because
dawned on me. I haven't chewed out enough people.
no, well, it's not that, but the thing is, it keeps you from being honest with people.
It can be, yeah. Yep, for sure.
Sincere. You're not sincere. I'm tolerant.
Yeah.
I'm not honest.
Tolerance is the mask of forgiveness, right?
I don't know.
That's what Chesterton said. That when we
Uh-huh.
tolerate anybody, we never go through the fleshy experience of forgiving that person, which
Yeah.
presupposes a disagreement. I can tell you
You
the
know.
monastery, you would like a monastery because in order for these guys, again, it's not otherworldly. The radical experience of a monastery, when I was very close to these Trappists, is they live their different temperaments. The only thing they have in common is they wear these same robes, basically, and they're
Hmm.
Catholic, but they're in the radical experience of trying to work it out, right?
Hmm.
So they have to be, consequently, they cannot be codependent. They
Hmm.
have to be honest. Because if you make everything seem nice, though you hate it, it's going to come out and it's going to disrupt things. But
Yeah.
it's a petri dish in becoming human. And
Right.
that Dietrich Bonhoeffer would say, amen, amen, amen. But it really
Mhm.
is, ladies and gentlemen. And that's a reason. I mean, it's really cool. If you live in New York City, people think that's diversity. No, you self-select for people who think exactly like you
Right.
do. It's almost a universal phenomenon. The monastery, because it is the way I described it, it makes you think that the conversation in New York City, even amongst these silent, nominally like these quiet monks, the level
Mhm.
of conversation is so powerful and it's so different and it seems so rich that it makes the kind of like urbane, fake provincial, I mean, imperialism of like a city just seems so boring in comparison.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
You know, I see a correlation with that and families slash teaching.
Say it again.
So bigger
Say it.
families,
Yeah.
and this is what I noticed with being a teacher, you know, so the kids who had brothers and sisters, they could get over stuff. They'd get in a squabble with one of the other kids in the class and it's over.
Yeah.
Whereas the kids who were only children, not almost every time, would get into a fight with another kid or a disagreement, and it would be the end of the world because they're not used to forgiving people and putting up with
Right.
people's
Right.
shit, right?
Right.
And you see, but you also see that with parents, you know, so especially what if you get the older parents who wait till they're having children, they have just one, and that kid, I call that kid the project because
Mhm.
everything is what I remember I saw an interview with Alec Baldwin of all people many years ago, talking about his daughter, and he was he married to Kim Basinger, whoever he was married
Yeah,
to,
he
but
was.
they called their daughter Elvis. I
Uh-huh.
said, why? In the interview, so why you call him Elvis? Because we're like those guys who used to hang around Elvis. What you want to do now, Elvis? Elvis won't go out. So that's what people do when they have one child,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
What you want to do, Elvis? Yeah. So Elvis is running things,
Yeah.
you know, and it's true. I see it all the time. But going back to Bonhoeffer, right?
Hmm.
And his examination of the language we use. And
Hmm.
that's what I love about the cost of discipleship, which
Right.
is like reading Simone Weil.
Hmm.
You know, it's so scathing an indictment of all of us. But when he talks about cheap grace, right?
Yeah.
I,
Unpack
I'm
that for our listeners a little bit.
I'm bathed in the blood of the lamb,
Right. Right.
right?
Right.
That's cheap grace, you
Hmm.
know. And and he talks, I'm interested in costly grace. Yeah, that kind of grace doesn't cost you anything.
No,
Show me a
but it's
grace
also what
that
he
costs you.
diagnosed as religion, right? Kind of hocus pocus. These words that they haven't landed, they're not touching wood.
Hmm.
You know, that Jesus Christ, my personal Lord and Savior. That is the profoundest confession somebody can make. But what does it mean when the words themselves are hovering, you know, 50,000 feet above the way that we can
Yeah.
viscerally take them in any respect, right?
Or if it's scrolled across a t-shirt or a bumper sticker, right?
Hmm.
Then you know, game over.
Yeah.
Because that's what Heidegger talked about, the impoverishment of language. It doesn't mean anything anymore,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
How can we find words that
And doesn't
like
that, again,
that
to go
mean?
back to repentance being ultimate honesty, you know,
Mhm.
that's the vulnerability to be totally honest with somebody else in front of you, right? And to go deeper and deeper. You realize,
Mhm.
even if you start to make that a goal, you start to realize how many of the words coming out of your mouth and my mouth are still kind of untethered. You know, but what if we
Mhm.
could find, or isn't in an inverse way, you know, Soloviev says in that book, The Meaning of Love, that we've discussed on this, you know, that especially Barfield in his introduction, that he says, you know, the next eon, the eon I think we're trying to be born into now, he said the human being is called upon to kind of harness and domesticate, not domesticate, but use love in the same way that grunts became words and a way of communicating. You know,
Mhm.
do you think there's a connection between some of the stuff we're talking about radical conversation, non-codependent, being clear, and what maybe Soloviev was trying to intimate, that, you know, to know is to love. I was at a great event last night at Tenebrae service, and one of the young girls was talking about, um, it was great. It was just great. You know, a young teenager was witnessing and was saying that her mother had, you know, kind of made her see the connection between knowing and to loving, to love and to know.
Um, well, I think so. I think well, I may have talked about this before, but um, even before I was a Waldorf teacher, I had a lot of friends who were Hare Krishnas. There was a huge Hare
You
Krishna
mentioned that, but you were never a
population.
Hare Krishna yourself.
No,
Did
But
you
I used
feel
to go to
drawn to it? Okay.
they had Sunday feast. I would always go. Food was great. The people are super nice.
Yeah.
You know, they talk about Eastern philosophy,
What
which
was
is,
their
you know,
downside? I just don't know much about the entity.
I don't know. I mean, I was never that into it. I didn't
They
have
weren't
any
into a
my own
doomsday
experience of
cult or
them. There were
anything.
no downsides of my experience with
Oh
them.
yeah. There was no
Yeah.
doomsday cult. There was never like a
No, they were full
massive
of
conspiracy. Yeah.
they're you know, it's Bhakti Yoga. They're full of bliss, right? They're
Yeah, right.
happy,
Right.
right? And but one of the things, and
Interesting.
if you're out there, I don't know if he's still alive. I hope he is because I love that guy. His name was Paul Lacricchio, but his religious name was Pandu. And he was one
What was
of the
his
people
religious name again?
Pandu.
Pandu. I
And
like that.
Pandu, if you know the Bhagavad Gita, you know, Krishna's in the chariot with what's his name? I can't
We
remember.
all know it. We all know it.
It'll come to me.
Starts with
But
R. Starts with
Pandu
R.
is that Pandu is the guy's father. So he's
Okay.
one of the sons of Pandu. So
Okay.
my friend's name was Pandu. And one of the things he told me that they had been taught, right? That was part of the teaching of the Krishna movement. And I'll never forget this because I live by it to a degree that one of the forms of love is to reveal your mind to another,
Yeah. Right. Wow. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And I think it's true. And that's what I mean by being not being tolerant. I was being um or being a kind of phony tolerant or just the tolerance where you just shut up and don't say anything because you're afraid you might offend somebody.
Now, what venues were you being this way?
Pardon me?
Like, what venues did you find yourself acting in this way? Because you're a pretty straight shooter, I think, with whoever you are. What, like, I think our listeners
Oh,
might wonder, like, where were you having these kind of artificial
well, it
conversations?
happens all the time, you know, where you kind of self-monitor, right?
Oh, we all do, I guess, but okay,
Especially in academic circles,
fair.
you know, because those aren't circles that appreciates clear clear
No,
language
no, no, it's the
and
opposite.
forthright speech.
Yeah. But
They just aren't.
yeah, but what you said about that Hare Krishna art of conversation, it's just so
And I
true.
love
I
that.
think again, I think that's the zone where we are now, 2000 years after the incarnation. You know, it's in this real as we might say it this way, kind of like Sophia versus Ariman, but we're seeing so many young people interface, right? This was a big thing for like Ivan Illich. If our metaphor for the self is a computer, ergo we shut down when we die,
Mhm.
we no longer have the intransitive verb of like, you know, dancing into death. But that we find out so many people when they think it's conversation, they're interfacing like, my
Mhm.
parents are so liberal. My parents are so. This is how you see a lot of people talking. And
Right.
what's really so the worst being the corruption of the best, it's and where we see evil. Let's stop using the word evil for everything. Maybe this is the heart of evil, the difference between interfacing and like conversation and
Mhm.
interest. But
Right.
this Goethean art of conversation. All these people that
Right.
our listeners know that we admire, Novalis, they thought it could all be done in so it's that same way. Novalis with the blue flower, this idea of his love
Mhm.
with Sophie. So much of that is based on conversation and getting to know
Yeah.
somebody. Adam knew Eve, right? This type of thing.
Right. And I think that's one of the impoverishments of language, as you were just alluding to, right? Is that some people they don't reveal their minds as a form of love because they don't know their minds, so they
Right.
speak
Huge.
ideology, right?
Mm-hmm.
They speak ideology instead. So you're not really speaking to a person that way,
Right.
though you would
And we
like
know
to.
it right
The thing
away
is,
when you're having a conversation, you realize you're not speaking to a person. And it's not going to change, folks. When you find yourself in a conversation, it usually doesn't change in the course of that conversation. You have to learn to get out pretty quickly and politely, I think.
and I
I don't
would
know.
suggest this might be controversial, but when you and when we do it too, I mean, I think when people who speak ideology or you can't penetrate to their being, you're interfacing with a spiritual entity. It could be a
Mm-hmm.
demon, right? But it's
Right.
not the person. It's a form of so in a way you're dealing with a form of possession.
Yeah.
Even if it's a possession of an idea,
Now, people on the
which
right,
also has a being behind it.
yeah. A lot of our listeners too could be imaging. There's that famous, she's memed a lot, this young girl screaming. I might have think It was taken
Well,
during
the
Trump's first
Trump
inauguration.
one.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
That's a funny
The
meme.
first inauguration,
Yeah.
that lady's face is melting down. But then people, so they know what we're speaking of. There's an egregore. I mean, there's something there. But there's just as many, on the alt-right, they say elements are getting so dark, on that, that when people use that to hate on so much, so let's think of that image of the young girl. There's a whole movement on the right where they hate on that so much that they're getting backed into a very similar corner on the right, where something
Well,
dark is overtaking
yeah.
them.
You know what our boy William Blake would say, right?
It's
They
tell me.
became what they beheld.
Yeah, right.
Hmm.
Hmm.
And I think that's one of the more brilliant psychological statements I've ever
Yeah.
ever encountered.
Hmm.
They became what they beheld.
Yeah. Lately, I've been using his truth consolidates error a lot.
Hmm.
You see things going on, but we don't know where we're going to move, corporately, as a world, individually, housing prices, everybody feels paralyzed. But as we're doing it, you can see, everybody's looking for a vast plan. But if we do the next right thing, you start to see that like the error that we fight against is becoming so comical. It's like a
Hmm.
pimple coming to a head or something. It's becoming such a parody of itself that we have to keep on moving forward day by day. But truth consolidates error more than the idea of truth just has to like beat the living shit out of error like repeatedly.
Right.
Just keep on, because that's consequentialist thinking, that we have to come up. They're always strategizing for the next thing, where
Hmm.
the correct spirituality is like, have courage and do the next right thing.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, that's what like Jesus tells the apostles, don't worry about what you're going to say.
Right.
Right? The Spirit will speak through you.
You mean we're not supposed to have a focus group, Mike, and
Really.
have some committee meetings about what we're going to say?
That's right.
Yeah.
We're finding that with this demographic, Jesus, we could reach. Well, it's the same thing that happened to St. Francis, right?
Say more.
When St. Francis went to convert the Sultan, and he was gone for a month or two,
Hmm.
and he came back to Assisi, and in his absence, the monks said, "We made a few changes," and
Yeah.
they got all this stuff, and they had like a corporate board or whatever, right? Board of directors, and Francis just came in the room, looked at all this stuff they had, sat down on the floor, and threw ashes on his food,
Yeah.
and he would never live in the monastery again.
Hmm. What would you call that formation? Like, so in one sense, they formed a company in his absence. For one, they try to consolidate it's almost like they try to
It was
control the few.
Franciscan ink.
Right. But what spiritual term would you use to say, this thing descended on them, this spirit?
The egregore
Yeah.
was the egregore of the Catholic Church or whatever it was. Well,
Okay.
I think the thing is, I mean, if you think
Interesting.
about
Okay.
this, when people, when two or more are gathered in my name,
Mhm.
but the thing is, I think that's an absolute spiritual principle. But I also think that when groups form together, there is another spirit that wants to get involved.
Well, that helps so much. So, when I said Dietrich Bonhoeffer, that when he looked at repentance through the notion of ultimate honesty, I knew, and I'd submitted it and it was published in Jesus the Imagination. But I've done a lot of work on salvation, just like you're saying, that in the Zacchaeus story, they say Zacchaeus, because what you were talking about there, Michael, was a crowd phenomenon, right?
Right.
Jesus, I say it clearly now, and I gave retreat talks on this Lent, that a sensitive reading of the gospel, and you find this a lot in this book, one of my all-time favorites, Morning Light by John Sullivan, I mentioned. But you get a sense, Sullivan gets it, that like Jesus could be talking to 5 to 7 people, and it could be a community and they hear the gospel, but they could morph into a crowd, and then he goes to the other side of the lake. The gospel can only be preached to people. It can't be preached to a crowd. It's
Hmm.
politicians that are very good at working with crowds. But
Hmm.
anyhow, for your illustrious journal, Jesus the Imagination, I've tried to rehabilitate a word that's kind of come untethered, but it's the word salvation. And we can find it. It's not used much in the Gospels. Where we do find it is kind of in the follow-up to the story about Zacchaeus. Everybody knows the small person who climbed the tree.
Yeah.
But the story that is most memorable to people is probably most memorable because it's needed in our time. Zacchaeus could not see Jesus, it says in every translation, because of the crowd. Boom,
Hmm.
it's said for us. In the article I wrote too, Orpheus was known to like have rocks dance for him,
Hmm.
and it was an issue on Christ Orpheus. But Zacchaeus too, they're chiding him for this as followers. Like, why'd you invite this man to your house, or why'd you? And they're chiding Jesus, and Jesus said, "I've come to seek and save what is lost." So there's salvation, friends. Let's
Mhm.
rehabilitate that word. It means one by one, as Christians, followers of Jesus, we have to rescue people from this horrible thing called crowd phenomenon, where
Mhm.
they interface with people. Salvation in our time is being rescued from the crowd. And finally, they keep on telling Jesus, no, the egregore, follow the egregore. And he says, I won't, or the stones themselves will cry out. Elias Canetti, in his famous book of poetry on crowds, it's there in the work of John Cooper Powys. When
Mhm.
crowds form, they're as dense as stones. They're as dense as stones. We know in Peter got caught up in a crowd phenomenon when he denied Jesus 3 times.
Mhm.
He just became
Exactly.
one with
Exactly. Mhm.
100%, like Rene Girard gets at this. So in our time, salvation, we don't need to think of it any further for a long time, as one by one rescuing people from ideology,
Right.
from crowd phenomenon. Right.
And this is actually something Rudolf Steiner was onto as well,
Mhm.
because I can't remember where I read it, but it's been a long time. That one place he writes, or something he was recorded, that he said that he wished he could have a new name for anthroposophy every day,
Right, right, right.
because people get so stuck on what they think the word means, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of ossification, I think that it's not just true in anthroposophy, it's true in every situation. I mean, how do you keep it alive? How do you not let those forces of death come in and start to, if not kill, at least insulate or somehow compromise the livingness that's there, right? And
How
this is in
tensile
Jesus
is
as
your word
Zoe, right?
sophiology? Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you think it's going to go for your word sophiology? How, like, she by her nature might help kind of push this thing off, but she could be commodified pretty quickly, or where do you think that?
Well, I'm sure. Well, yeah. So you see, if you look up sociology, there's a lot of really crazy shit up on sociology on the internet. But so this is what for myself though,
Yeah.
and so when I've been interviewed about sociology on podcasts or whatever, they always ask me, "What is sociology?" And I'm like, I don't really have a definition,
Yeah.
because definitions kill, right? And
Yeah.
even if
You're consistent
there's
on that. I
somebody
agree. Yeah.
I saw he posted someplace, I can't remember, it was a book review. So I read this whole book on sociology, so about the submerged reality, and I finally get to the end, and he guys says he doesn't know what it means. But I don't want to come to a definition,
No,
right?
right, right, right.
The dictionary is the graveyard of words.
Yeah.
Um, but I see, so there's like the crazy feminist version of sociology. It's all
Yeah.
about, which is very luciferic, if you ask me.
Hmm.
And then there's the kind of an orthobro approach to sociology, which just wants to turn into an interesting philosophical school
Yeah.
of
A new
thought.
devotion to Mary or
I hate
something.
that.
Yeah. Yeah.
To me, that those both killeth the letter,
Yeah.
right?
I think the closest word, it's nice that it's Greek and we don't overuse it, like metaxu kind of
Yeah.
captures some of it. But again, but again, it's fun to see, like, how they do those word things where some words are big and small. That would
Hmm.
be, there's metaxu is a word we could throw in there. Phenomenologies
It
were
is a
a
good
word
word.
we could throw in there.
And you know who I'm gonna plug my friend's book right now. So Stephen Nepper wrote Wonder Strike. Steve, it's a
Okay.
great book. I know Steve
Uh,
watches this.
All right, cool.
But Steve, yeah, actually he sent this to me. I'm halfway through finally. It's a beautiful book, but it's about the thought of William Desmond, the
Yeah, I saw
Irish
the
Catholic
subtitle there.
philosopher.
Yeah.
And Desmond is big on the metaxu, right? The
Yeah, right,
between.
right. See, I haven't read him. I know his name.
Yeah, he's really good. I mean, you'd like him.
Yeah.
You would certainly like him.
Bill, yeah, David Cayley has interviewed him. We'll
Yeah,
have to
he's
have
a
David back on soon.
and he actually wrote the introduction to my book. What's it called?
Um,
uh, The Incarnation of the Poetic Word.
William Desmond did?
He did,
Okay, yeah.
and which I was surprised he said yes when I asked him,
Hmm.
or my publisher asked him. I think I was too afraid to ask.
Yeah,
Don't
and
know,
when
put the guy in the spot.
if I think of did William Desmond, if I think of the Cayley interviews where he interviewed Desmond, could Desmond be associated with the radical Christianity group a little bit? Or I'm sorry, radical orthodoxy? Was he
He could
tangential to
be.
that a little bit? trying to think what
He's
series he was in.
tangential, but I mean,
Oh,
he's definitely he's he's adjacent.
okay.
So he knows. I mean, he's friends with Milbank and
Yeah, right, right.
um. So yeah, he was at a conference at Notre Dame, maybe 8 years ago. It was before
Hmm.
Marigold Flows, and so I went and I just went to just check it out. But Milbank was there, David Bentley Hart was there, Desmond was there, a
Okay.
bunch of other people. Who else was there? I can't remember who else was there.
Hmm.
And so he fits in with that crowd, right?
Yeah. And again, it's a nice crowd that hovers in the
That's a nice
constellation of
crowd.
Sophiology. Milbank
Mhm.
is interestingly on Sophiology.
Yeah.
Um, when he reviews things, he gets it. So let me, because Michael, I texted you yesterday, I had been reading something about the eclipse, and we don't need to do too much with this, but I texted you yesterday and said 10:30 tomorrow on the eclipse. And then I
And
hit
we've been talking about
record the
everything
cloud.
else.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
I saw a tweet. It was from that Bishop Strickland, who's Pope Francis kind of bitch slapped about some, and I
Mhm.
forgot the zone of totality goes down to Tyler, Texas. But he was tweeting about the eclipse, and this could be a wonderful thing. And I thought he was sending people because I live in one of the zones of totality right in upstate New York, and we're expected all these street signs like you see in. We used to only hear about it in places like Orwell, but it's right now. Municipalities are saying these signs at you all the time. Smoke
Right.
weed and you die. But it's just that we're going to face gridlock here around the Finger Lakes in Rochester for the day of the eclipse because we're in the zone of totality.
Oh, are
Uh,
you? Yeah, we're not.
yeah,
We're just a little bit north of the zone of
okay.
totality.
But it sounds like a Woodstock type event. So when Bishop Strickland was just wishing people, we could pray for them. I don't know. I probably disagree with that guy and everything, but I wondered if this is a bigger, like this is a thing. It's a thing,
You know
and
what?
then, it's a thing, I think.
I think, well, it is a thing.
Yeah.
So, in this, I usually, as an astrologer, I don't put a whole lot into eclipses
Right.
unless it's hit somebody's point someplace or somebody's planet or whatever.
Hmm.
Um, but so actually, when I wrote a bunch of astrological predictions in January, I didn't even mention the eclipses,
Hmm.
but I wasn't paying attention to it. But then what happened a couple weeks ago, our mutual acquaintance, Mike Sullivan,
How do
he
I know Mike
messaged me.
Sullivan? I don't know him. Who's Mike?
You do know him. You do know
Okay.
him.
Okay.
You know him from
Oh yeah,
Facebook.
I do. I do. I do. I do. Yes. Yes.
And
And he
he
has a hat in
actually,
his profile. Yeah.
yes, and he actually, I'm the godfather to his daughter, Sophia.
Seems like a great guy.
He is a great guy. But he messaged me. He said, "Hey, you've been following Robert Powell, another former guest of the Regeneration
That
podcast."
guy's brilliant.
And I haven't been listening to his podcast. And so Mike sent me a couple of links.
He doesn't
And
speak fast.
no, but Robert
Yeah.
he's a real astrologer. I'm like
He
a
is.
seamless astrologer. But Robert was talking about the eclipses, and though he was saying, "I don't want to be a prophet, it's sketchy business to get into," but it's interesting that the path of the eclipse in, was it 2017,
Yeah.
is, but the path of that one with the path of this one
So
forms
around
an
northern Ohio or like a southern Ohio or something? The cross
forms an
kind of.
well, it forms an X, and the X meets in southern Illinois, actually.
Okay. Okay.
And Mike lives in Illinois. He was thinking about going down to watch it
Oh,
from
I see. It's cool.
there. And so I listened to what Robert had to say, and I've known Robert not well, but for 30 years. I think I first called him on the phone maybe 1997, maybe earlier, when he was living in Germany at the time. I don't know how I got his phone number, but I got his phone number. So I'm going to talk to this guy. Because Robert, for those of you who might not know, is the translator of the English edition of Meditations on
Meditations.
the Tarot. Super important book. But so anyway, Robert was talking about this, and he said, I'm not making predictions, but you know, and we can think about this in terms of a poetic metaphysics, that he thought that the cross being inscribed across the United States in these extraordinarily dark times is actually a good sign. And he even suggested, it might be that people have the experiences of Christ on a mass scale.
Mm.
And this will be on April 8th. where where the solar eclipse happens. But what he didn't talk about, and he may talk about someplace else. So I started thinking about it, and there was a lunar eclipse this week, Mike. I don't know if you heard,
Right. No, I didn't.
on the feast of the Annunciation, which I think for some reason the Roman Church moved it um to the following week. But the feast of the Annunciation it's the most important feast
But
in
where
a
they
way.
moved it because of like in Holy Week and everything, it's going to be on the day of the eclipse,
They're
which is
moving it to the
interesting.
day of the eclipse,
Yeah, it's February 8th.
April 8th.
I'm sorry, April 8th. Yeah.
They
Yeah.
moved it to April. Wow, that's
Yeah, that's
heavy.
my understanding. Right. It's heavy. It's
That is
heavy.
heavy. I
Just
thought they
Google
just
that. You'll
moved it
see
a
people
week.
are writing on that. They're writing on it, like Graham
They
Greene's
moved it to
essay on
that.
the assumption and the bomb and
Wow.
stuff. Yeah, yeah.
I need a minute, man. You know what I'm saying? Uh,
I
that's
think I'm
heavy.
right. Yeah,
If
that's
they moved
heavy.
it to the day of the eclipse, I'll have to check that out.
Michael, I
That's
think they moved it to the day of the eclipse.
because that means the lunar eclipse happened on the real feast, and
Yeah,
the solar eclipse happened. Man, if that's the truth. But anyway,
yeah, I think so.
maybe our listeners know this, maybe they don't. But the 25th of March, the feast of the Annunciation, was for the longest time in Christendom the day that the calendar year changed.
Hmm.
And the reason that was because that's the day in many things. So there was also thought to be the traditional day, the actual historical day of the crucifixion.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So it's the Annunciation. It's also the crucifixion.
Okay.
It was also thought to be the last day of creation from Genesis, the day on which God rested.
Hmm.
So if you know this book, I'm selling books today, Mike. Here's another book, really good book.
Okay.
Winters in the World by Eleanor Parker, who's a British scholar.
I
She's a
don't have that.
medieval,
Yeah.
a journey through the Anglo-Saxon year. And what she says in here, and I think it's brilliantly put, is especially through the Middle Ages in Christendom, March 25th was seen as the birthday of time.
Hmm.
And also, as we know, in Lord of the Rings, that's the day of the destruction of the ring.
Right. Okay. I didn't know that.
So that's a big deal.
Yeah.
It's a big fat deal.
Uh-huh.
And if the solar eclipse is happening on the moved date of the Annunciation, that is mind blowing. But anyway, so I've been thinking a lot about this myself, and I started thinking
New
in a
date of the Annunciation.
poetic metaphysics type of way that with this lunar eclipse on Monday, on the 25th,
Gotcha.
um,
Yeah, the Google didn't help me right there. Cool. Go ahead.
with the lunar eclipse on March 25th and the solar eclipse coming up. So I looked up some Steiner thoughts, and this is one of the things Robert was talking about in his podcast as well. But he calls it the incarnation of Sorath, and Sorath is actually comes from
He's a
gematria.
bad dude.
Well, it comes from Hebrew gematria, and it equals 666, right?
Hmm.
And so and Robert is really kind of pessimistic about the state of the world right now.
Yeah.
And he talks about the same people that I call
He's a
him the
Klaus
archons.
Schwab, and yeah.
With
He's right
Schwab
on that stuff.
and
Yeah.
Soros and all these evil
Trudeau and
bastards,
Bill Gates.
Bill Gates. Um, and Robert also talks about how much he really loves the people of the United States and the United States. He just hates the government, I think.
Hmm.
And he lived here for a long time in California. And maybe his kids were even born here. I don't know. But I think an interesting thing to look at is with the lunar eclipse coming before, because often the lunar eclipse will come 2 weeks after the solar eclipse. Um, on the feast of the Annunciation, in a way, what we're seeing with these two eclipses is it's almost um, a celestial or cosmic image of chapter 12 of the book of Revelation, right? With
Yeah, I
the
saw your
woman clothed
piece.
with the sun
Right.
and with the with the moon at her feet and crowned with 12 stars. But here's the other thing, right? So if you know that story from Revelation, that's when the dragon comes after her, right? in chapter 12. But get this, and this blew my mind when I found this out. So on the day of the eclipse, the solar eclipse on April 8th, first of all, there will be a comet will be in the vicinity, not too far from the sun. I mean, it won't be right next to it. It'll be, I think, 20 degrees. So, but like you'll be able to see it if it's clear, Mike. So what'll happen, solar eclipse happens, and then you'll be able to see, and I can't remember which direction it is from the sun. You'll probably be able to see this comet, which is called, get this, was it it's called the Devil Comet.
Really?
Or the Demon Comet, what's it called? Because it has two horns, which actually they're two tails, but it looks like it's got horns coming out of it. So it's like it's depicting exactly what's in the book of Revelation in the sky. And I don't know if you heard this too. This is the craziest shit I've heard. The U.S. government is planning some missile tests in front of the moon during the eclipse.
No, I haven't heard that. No.
I just sent this to Therese yesterday because I said, "What the hell is going on?" So I'll read you the headline of this news story, and this is a mainstream news story, so it's not, some alt media thing. So here's what I sent to Therese. Another, I'm just mentioning guests.
Yeah,
and actually,
you gotta have her back. She comes a new CD coming out.
She's got a new.
I see say
we're gonna have her back soon.
Yep.
So, girl, we thinking about you.
Absolutely.
So here's what I sent Therese the other day. And I said, who are these people? Coming in. Come on, baby. Open up. There it is. It's from Newsweek.
Okay.
That's about as mainstream as you get, right?
Yep.
Solar eclipse to see NASA send rockets into moon's shadow.
Huh.
What the heck?
Yeah.
And also, you have the Demon Comet at the same time. I just need, ladies and gentlemen, I just need time to process all this. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, you got a lot of stuff going on.
Oh, that's a lot going on right there.
Yeah, and I could be wrong on the holy day and everything, but I think that's
the other
the case.
Another weird astrological thing is happening. So, April 22nd, is it the 19th? There will be a conjunction of Jupiter and Uranus, which I've written about before, which is like a summer of love kind of vibe, right?
Right.
It's revolution, but it's love at the same time. But it also happens on when Passover happens this year. It coincides with Passover.
And that's late April?
April 22nd.
I think we could use another one of those vibes. I've been thinking a lot about that. When that movie Jesus Freaks came out this summer, that was interesting. There was some good stuff in there. That basic hippie movement that got co-opted, into something of the baby boomer phenomenon, obsession with like financial security. But there's obviously there was great stuff there. Like how about people who care for peace, the environment? We need, again, so many things come back with a difference, a return with a difference. And the baby boomer thing, I mean, not the baby boomer, the hippie thing was great. I'm close to Woodstock up here. The Catskill Mountains, there's a vibe down there. Ithaca, New York.
Well, I was just a little kid at the time, but I did have some contacts with Jesus freaks.
Okay.
Back in the day. And you know who the most famous Jesus freak is?
Trying to think. No.
There's two of them. Eric Clapton.
Okay.
Eric Clapton was a Jesus freak.
Didn't know that.
He still is. I mean, he's a very religious dude.
Yeah.
And that's why, in fact, who else is a Jesus freak from way back is Steve Winwood.
Wow. Okay. Yeah.
And remember when Steve Winwood and Eric Clapton were in a band called Blind Faith, just recorded one really good album. But that's where they have the song "The Presence of the Lord," which is a really great song.
Yeah.
We should link that. It's like a perfect Holy Saturday song.
It's called "The Presence of the Lord." I don't know if I'll even. I might be able to get this up today, but it might not. Well, I've got my daughters in town, but
it's really.
I'll look for it.
I mean, it's perfect for it's an Easter mood thing because
Okay, so so if it made it up in the in Easter certainly the octave of Easter to be up there.
Yeah,
People,
we're
cool.
good.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, I think, but I love it when I kind of love that moment in history, and of course, just like everything else, it gets ruined by the bad guys.
Right.
Just like, the peace and love thing
Mm-hmm.
got ruined by the yuppies,
Yep.
they were co-opted by corporatism, right? In
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
fact, you look now, the people you would least likely to be pro-war 30 years ago are the people who are pro-war.
So how about this? The yuppie co-optation is the same thing as the Franciscan movement. I mean, the hippie co-optation is the same thing as the Franciscan movement you
Hmm.
told moments ago.
Yeah,
Agreed? So
that's what
maybe
happens in
third
groups.
third time's the charm. Another hippie vibe that doesn't get co-opted, right?
How are
Because
you
we
going to
see,
keep it real, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
And that's one of the underpinning themes of mythologies of the wild god. Is it
Uh-huh.
how do you not let it become stale, right? or
Yeah.
or corrupted,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah.
Who do you think has written on that subject well? It's hard to commodify it. It's one of those things. It's like the flow. It's the um, ideology is its enemy.
Well,
We could
Steiner to a
we
degree,
could
but
do an apophatic approach to it, I suppose.
the Steiner did to a degree, but the thing is, every group that Steiner touched is turned to shit.
Right.
I mean, really, they're horrible. Like, they were actually some of the worst people during COVID.
Yeah.
The
Yep.
Anthroposophical Society and Waldorf Education.
Uh-huh.
They were some of the absolute worst. And
Yeah.
I just got an email, was it yesterday or this week? I got an email from somebody saying exactly that. You won't believe what happened to the Waldorf movement. And I'm like, oh yes, I will.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we should do a whole show on that. Like I'll start giving it some thought, like those things. I bet you there's a connection there between what we're saying, what I call the increasing incarnation of the word, or this whole idea of like the importance of conversation phenomenology. The keeping it real, that has to do with embodiment, all these
Mhm.
things, it really does. It really does. It's not just, living in the now. It's not just spacing out, living in the now, but it has to do with work, all those things. But it's like
It has to
we better
do
find out that way. Go ahead.
it has to do with ever making things, you know, behold, I make all things new.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's part of it, right? And this is why I know I have some people might think I have a problem with tradies and ortho bros. And I don't, the sentiment I get,
I
I
don't.
love tradition.
I love. Yeah.
But the thing is, I mean, how do you, and it's like even Ezra Pound, I mean, it's probably a bad example, but Ezra Pound's idea with poetry, right? Make it new.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is, how do you make religion new while having it also be grounded in a tradition, right?
Right. Right.
That's the challenge. But the problem is the novelty we do see in religion is usually just stupid,
Right.
it's embarrassing because it's commodified, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's got it's a brand, right?
Right.
And I think that's well, from my own experience, the danger with social media is turning oneself into a brand,
Right.
right? You're just
But
another
so
commodity among others, right?
the new is a brand even before it's there. I get that. But do you think there's something again, like how do we split the difference there? I was in like a 10-week cohort on Wednesday nights, which was another reason it was sometimes harder for you and I to get together. But it was really cool. It was kind of on preaching. And you saw it was about preaching from personal experience. And you saw on one side, um, people, you could say the
Uh,
conservatives didn't find it natural to, to speak from personal experience. This ties
mhm.
into a theme today. And then I got a sense, if you were looking at the Catholic Church, kind of on the progressive left, there's no better closeness to the individual, the person. It's just the political causes, right? So the preaching for a progressive priest was all about politics. We see
Right.
the whole notion of Pope Francis and synodality. There's a confusion on the right that people think it just releases in all the forces of chaos. Then there's an illusion on the left. They think it's just about getting your political project, if it's women's priesthood or something, done. Both sides seem to miss the notion, the centrality of listening, coming out of quiet, the bottom up, things like that. And I wonder, does that have something to do with keeping it real? That there's a danger to the right, there's a danger to the left, of course.
I think, I mean, how are you going to make things ever new, right?
Right.
Here's the problem with both of those sides you're just talking about. Both of their problems are they think someone's going to get it wrong, right?
Say it
Somebody's
again.
getting it wrong, or someone's going to get it wrong.
Yeah.
You can't do that. That's wrong, right?
But is that okay? Two things. Well, about that though, are they? If somebody's going to get it wrong, are they more interested in like schooling the other side, like schooling the libtards,
it's just
or
a
is
it's
that
a
the premise of
desire
what
for
you're saying?
control.
Okay, right. Yeah.
It's a desire for control, and it's an unconscious admission of insecurity.
Yeah.
And you see this, I think, see this with orthoporos, for instance, but also tradies who want to, they cling to the traditions of the church because they think it's going to save them. It's going to save the culture, right? It's going to save the world.
Yeah.
But lefties do too.
Yeah.
Whether they're clinging to social justice or they're whatever they think, right? That's going to save the world. But what underwrites both of those is an insecurity if I'm wrong, and then that's why they want to demonize other people because you're getting it wrong, right?
Yeah. And I think
And
it's an
neither one of
insecurity
those,
about the world, don't you? Each
neither
side
one
have
of
their own
those,
insecurity about engaging with the real.
neither one of those is, and and neither one of those is living in a prophetic space.
Uh-huh.
So I think, pardon me, to live in a prophetic space is in a way, to be in touch with the world. I mean, with the Sophianic
Agreed.
reality.
Agreed.
And you were asking earlier who was written about this. Well, he doesn't do it in a direct way, but the only person I can think who did it consistently and in a big way, and who wasn't afraid of getting it wrong, was William Blake.
I'm going to add John Cowper Powys to that.
Yeah.
Again, and again, it's a weird corpus, but yes. And to be honest, there's all these papers that say, like, in an article I wrote on Powys for the first issue of your journal, there's a quote in that article that says, everybody knows between the two that the connections between them could fill libraries. One comes much later and the corpus is completely unwieldy. But you're right. William Blake was, he never broke character on that one.
Well, he was always sincerely striving. So,
and that's the category for Goethe too.
Yeah, I think so. And if you read Blake in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, and compare that Blake to the Blake of Jerusalem, two different guys, but still the same guy. Well, you can see he was. I think when he wrote The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, he was around 30.
Okay.
And he was dealing with his inherited Christian tradition, which was also a crazy Christian tradition of Swedenborgianism, right? So he was wrestling with those traditions and that egregore, I think, in The Marriage of Heaven and Hell. But then he went through life, and then when he gets to Jerusalem, this is almost a different Blakean dispensation that he comes to, right? Where his understanding of Christ in Jerusalem is, I mean, it's more than liberating. It's imaginative. It's everything, right? But it's all grounded in forgiveness, right? I'm the greatest sinner in the world, yet Christ forgives me.
Yep. I forgive you, you forgive me. This is the bread, this is the cup, this is the wine. Yep. Fascinating. It was a great conversation. Again, having not
well, Mike and I don't talk. We can talk for about 8 hours.
Yeah. I just, before again, if people, if they didn't hear the beginning, before Michael came on, I could see he was signing on. I just started hitting record, and I'll take out the first 8 seconds, which would be silence. Then there you were, and we just began today's show. Thank you for everybody. Happy Easter to all the listeners.
Happy Easter.
I hope to get this up tonight or tomorrow. And happy that whole octave of Easter and the whole Easter season, which is longer than the season of Lent. Yeah. And God bless you all. And I'm going to hit stop. Thanks for listening to the Regeneration Podcast.